Hello and welcome to this week's Opening Bell. I'm Boxing News editor Tris Dixon, joined as always by Matt Christie, who normally I'd ask how he's doing. He always says he's doing all right, so let's move straight on.
I'm just getting over a cold.
Can you just... I'm going to have to do take two at this rate. Right, Matt, massive weekend of boxing ahead.
Yeah.
Our lead preview this week is Marcos Maidana against Josecito Lopez. Could be a fight of the year contender. Another one after, we've had Lebedev against Guillermo Jones. We've had Bradley against Provodnikov. We've had Rios, Alvarado too. This could be right in the mix, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those where you think the styles will mesh. And I think Lopez, he's probably going to be pretty heavy underdog, but he'll have a lot to prove after that loss to Alvarez. Where he was clearly he was outweighed. It was a wrong fight for him. You can't blame him for taking it, but he was severely outgunned there. Maidana, who's stepping up in weight. Ultimately, this is going to be a far more evenly matched fight, I think.
It's Maidana's acid test at welterweight, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
So I mean, you mentioned about Maidana being a slight favourite. The bookies here, according to Oddscheck, haven't been able to separate them.
Oh right, okay.
So it's
really?
it's that good of a fight. It's that good a fight. So I mean it's the thing is, I think it's the blending styles, isn't it? I mean, Lopez is a warrior, game, hungry, ambitious. Hasn't had the credit he's deserved. Even when he beat Victor Ortiz and stunned him in a thriller, it was because Ortiz didn't want to fight on because he'd hurt his jaw, and then. There was a lot of accusations kicking around about Ortiz's fighting heart. No one was saying what a good job Josecito Lopez had done. And then obviously he got the big money payday against Sal Alvarez to follow up, as you said. But ultimately it wasn't the best fight to take in terms of his career move, because I think it was on the cards that he was going to be outweighed and eventually battered by the bigger man, which is what happened. So now he's almost going back to basics, a bit where he was before the Ortiz fight, and he has the chance to build himself again.
Yeah, he does, and I remember speaking to him shortly after he'd beaten Ortiz, and he was kind of well aware that despite the fact he'd won that fight, the story of that fight was Ortiz had lost it rather than Lopez had won it. But determined, extremely determined young man, and I think, as I said earlier, he'll have a point to prove. But against Maidana, he's going to be going in with someone, who's known for his own will and his own punching power. Neck on chopping block, I think I'd probably edge towards Maidana, but it's one of those fights where whatever the outcome is, it's not going to be that much of a surprise.
I think I'm going to edge towards Lopez.
Okay.
And after you picked Martin Gethin to win last week, I think I know where people will be following.
Perhaps, we all make mistakes, apart from you, obviously.
Are you top of the Boxing News Prediction League?
I am top of the Boxing News Prediction League. Yeah, I think I'm 4 or 5 points clear.
Okay, all right. Still, on that note, I do think Lopez Maidana, which is on Box Nation, will be an absolute belter.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is I'm not sure that Maidana's power has translated all the way up to welterweight. And I think that could be an interesting thing, because obviously I don't think he's going to be knocking people flat the same way he did at light welterweight.
No.
Lopez, we know, is tough and durable. So I think it could be down to, without wanting to reel off a list of cliches, but hunger, desire and ambition. There goes a list of cliches. And but I think it could be down to that. And I think work rate as well. And I think Lopez could be the busier man through the fight.
Yeah.
So my money's on Lopez. But for me, I think the undercard sees a slightly more clear-cut fight with Cuban Arizlande Lara fighting Alfredo Angulo. I think it's clear-cut in my mind, and I'll tell you which way I'm going in a minute. Which way are you going for that fight?
Lara, I just think he's got in a similar way that you can not guarantee, but in a similar way that Maidana and Lopez will mesh to create a nice mix of styles. It almost looks like Lara's got the style to beat Angulo. Big fan of Angulo, like the way he fights. He's slightly crude. Lara's anything but, and I think he'll put it together and beat Angulo quite convincingly. But you can't write Angulo off, can you? I mean, he looks like a 1970s kind of horror movie.
It's like a Quentin Tarantino.
He looks like an absolute raging lunatic at the moment. But I'm a big fan of his look. Big fan of his look at the moment. That's how all boxers
Very envious of his hair as well.
I've got over that, Tris.
So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's Lara's fight to lose. I think provided he can stay disciplined, stick to a game plan, he should handily outboxed Angulo. And I'm thinking by something like 9 rounds to 3, something along those lines. I just think Angulo's looked really one-dimensional, one-paced since he had that massive period of inactivity when he had all the immigration problems a year or two ago. I'm not sure he was the same fighter since. I'm not sure he was all that good in the first place, if I'm being honest. You know, in terms of my assessment, I've never been massively sold on him. I watched his last fight. I was ringside there when he fought Jorge Silva in Los Angeles on the same bill that Amir Khan fought Carlos Molina. And Angulo looked sort of pretty one-paced, pretty one-dimensional, didn't do anything out in the ordinary. And he's obviously, not only has he had that period of inactivity, but he had his bubble burst quite badly by James Kirkland in that shootout in one of the best fights last year.
Yeah.
Was it the year before?
I think it was the year before.
Yeah, in 2011, when he lost in the 6th round to Kirkland, who we know is a puncher, but who, like Angulo, is rather one-paced and one-dimensional. So yeah, Lara on points for me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Completely agree.
Or you know, Lara, who's got 11 stoppages in his 17 wins, could bust him up, couldn't he?
Yeah, it's feasible. It's feasible. I mean, I'd edge towards a points win, a lopsided points win for Lara. But yeah, it's not out of the question that there'll be a stoppage there. Do you give Angulo anything more than just the puncher's chance?
I was just going to say that the puncher's chance is where you'd sort of spread your bet, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know, Angulo sort of maybe in rounds 6 to 10 if he starts to get. Excuse you. If he starts to get a bit desperate, maybe in round 6 to 9, give him a puncher's chance. But if he's still in there by round 10, I think he'll be what Teddy Atlas calls a game quitter. And someone who's sort of there boxing to last the distance and survive, rather than someone who's still got that ambition and throwing rockets like he was in the early rounds. So I don't give him anything more than a puncher's chance, because Angulo's he's not a guy who's massively busy. He's not a guy who's going to throw 150 punches around. He's trained by Virgil Hunter. I've got my own ideas about Virgil Hunter that don't seem to corroborate with a lot of other people's ideas. I don't see the improvements he's made with Amir Khan, and there's different things that, you know, I wonder if we would all be talking about Hunter in such glowing terms if he didn't have Andre Ward.
Well, I think in terms of his reputation is in its infancy, isn't it? And it's all from Andre Ward, and I think you can't really judge him until maybe 5-6 years down the line, and he's got some results, or he hasn't with these guys. But yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see, because there's so much potential with Angulo, because he's so raw and so rugged that we will be able to see how much Hunter's working, how much his work with him's paid off, because they've been together sort of 8 or 9 months now. So let's see if there's a more polished Angulo, and you know, the proof of the pudding, as they say, is in the eating. And you know, that before we start saying this, that, and the other, then let's see what they deliver in the ring. Yeah. The thing is, what I don't like it then is if you do say, well, you know, after the event, people say you're wise after the event, but you know, for me, as a trainer, he hasn't proved what he can do with anyone apart from Andre Ward yet.
No, I agree. I think, but as I say, I think the jury's still out on Hunter, but I completely understand what you're saying about him. But maybe he will work miracles with Angulo. Maybe we will in time see what he's trying to do with Khan. Yeah. And then we'll see it in 2 or 3 years. But I think it's too soon. It's too soon at the moment to judge.
Okay. So on Box Nation, it's a bit of a boxing fest, isn't it, on Saturday night? How it should be, really, because before that, they've got another possible fight of the year contender. When Marco Huck and Olaf Alabi come to blows for the 3rd time, and they've produced 2 corkers, you wouldn't mind me saying. and they've had 2 belters, haven't they? And it's hard to imagine this going any other way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean we've got the benefit of having 2 previous fights with which to make a judgment on how we think the third one's going to go in terms of entertainment value, and you'd think this one is just going to be the same. I think there's an argument, and I think the argument is getting stronger, that Hook isn't the fighter he was even 18 months ago. There's certainly some decline there. Whether the trip up to heavyweight and then back down again has had an effect, I'm not sure. Or what, but he's been in a long run of hard fights, Marco Hook, and perhaps Afolabi, perhaps it's Afolabi's time. But I think whichever way it goes, it's going to be fun to watch.
I think Afolabi always the bridesmaid, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. I mean, this is his 3rd try, isn't it? I mean, I remember when he knocked out. I remember watching it in a bar in Southampton. What was the main event that night when Afolabi knocked out Macronelli? What fight was I waiting for?
Was it Khan Barrera? Or Khan Kotelnik? Or something? Was it something?
Maybe it was
Khan
Barrera. I'm not sure. What was the main event that night? Anyway.
I remember. I should remember. I was there.
Yeah.
I remember. I was there. Yeah. But I remember also that Enzo was on such a bad run that he got destroyed by Lebedev on a similar bill on a Khan undercard.
But the Afolabi fight was kind of the beginning. It was not when it wasn't clear that he was on this bad run, wasn't it? That was a bit of a shock.
Yeah, definitely. He was in there pitching and sort of fighting and winning rounds and what have you. So hold on, I'll just find that out. I'm sure. I feel like probably jumping up and down and say, "Don't you remember that?"
Yeah, I feel like it was Amir Khan. I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah. So I mean, Afolabi, I think this is with all that in mind is his best chance of scooping some gold.
Yeah, it was Khan Barrera
Right.
On a bill where Nicky Cook fought Roman Martinez and Bradley Price fought Matthew Hall. That was a quite grueling knockout as well when Matthew Hall took out Bradley Price in 2 rounds. That happened right in front of me. I think if you were to study it hard enough, and I know what you're like, Matt, you might see me ringside as Price hit the deck in that one. I covered that fight with former editor Claude Abrams. But yeah, back to what we're talking about here, Afolabi and Huck. The interesting thing I've seen in terms of the quotes from Huck this week, that he thinks that he lost the motivation for the second Afolabi fight, having been up to heavyweight and fought Povetkin. He thought he lost. He thought he didn't. Maybe there was something lacking from his performance. So I think the thing about that is I'm not like you say. I think there could be some actual decline in Huck there. I also think that he raised his game above any other level that he could have done for Povetkin, and he fought a Povetkin who was completely demotivated and probably didn't really want the fight. So I thought we saw the best Huck and probably the worst Povetkin that night.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Which produced a great fight. Let's make no bones about it. But ultimately, I think Huck is going to be. I just can't see him. I can't see any other outcome apart from him getting a really grueling, tough decision victory over Afolabi.
Well, you think Afolabi will?
No,
you think Huck will win on points? I think I'd go with that. I was thinking about it this morning on the way into work. Huck Afolabi, and it's a difficult one. You can make a case for Afolabi getting it this time, but I think you would have to go. You would have to go with the champion to retain.
If Afolabi won, that would level the series with 1 win for Huck, 1 win for Afolabi, and a draw. So you'd have to have a 4th fight. But if this is resolved on Saturday night, it's a shame that people won't talk about this as one of the great trilogies, isn't it? Because it's just not. It just hasn't seemed to capture the wider imagination. Has it?
No. I think it may be. It will certainly be thought of fondly within
the trade.
Yeah, within the trade, within the hardcore fans and the hardcore followers, certainly. I mean, we'll see what happens tomorrow. It may be, tomorrow may be an even more memorable fight than the previous 2, and it may get some more spaces in the media for which. But what I was thinking this morning was, it's not that often that when a fighter has, if that it's, a fighter will have one fight or lose, he'll have another fight and he won't win. It's not very often they get a third bite of the cherry. I was thinking, how many fighters have had that third chance after not winning either of the first two and then come back and won? The first one that came to mind was Jersey Joe Walcott against Ezard Charles. But I just couldn't think of that many more. And I think if Afolabi does win this one, I think he should get a lot of credit for beating a guy that he hasn't beaten in 2 previous encounters.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that you mentioned in terms of people getting a third crack. I mean, one of the reasons why Afolabi's getting a third crack is not just because he's shown that he deserves to be in there with Huck, but people buy into these series, these trilogies, as if they're, as if it's like Star Wars or Police Academy or something. Yeah. You see part 1, you see part 2, and you want to see the rest, like Pacquiao Marquez. Pacquiao Marquez, people who watch the first 2 or 3 fights, they might not have just been boxing fans. They might have just been fans who want to watch those guys fight. And I could see that. I mean, this is already basically what I'm saying is these guys are playing to a captive audience. The people who saw Huck and Afolabi 1 and 2 will want to watch the third one, no question. And so they don't have to promote as heavily as they might do they?
No, of course not. And that's what I said at the start. We have got the benefit of those 2 fights, the first 2 fights, with which to see, with which to make a judgment on how entertaining this one was going to be. And it's like if Froch and Kessler hadn't fought before, that wouldn't have been the event that it was.
Yeah.
And it's similar with Afolabi and Huck.
Interesting you should say that, actually. If we can, we should pick up on that later on about Froch, Kessler and people doing that. Because I was speaking to Elliot Wurzel yesterday, David Hayes' biographer, and we can go back to this later on, but he said that the atmosphere, obviously it was brilliant. From the moment Froch's music kicked in, it was brilliant and no one thought about anything else apart from the fight. But the interesting thing when Froch fought Lucien Boutte was that he was stepping into the unknown. And it had Kessler and Froch not boxed before. Now I wonder if there would have been more mystery and intrigue the week of the fight. Do you know what I'm saying? So that, it really caught fire when Froch's music hit. But before then, going up to that point, was there much intrigue and mystery about it? It wasn't, because everyone kind of knew what was on the cards.
Yeah, there may have been more mystery and intrigue, but I think sometimes that's not always, that doesn't always translate into thrills and spills on the night, does it? And I think we all knew that Froch Kessler 2 would be a good fight. Yeah. And I think that's really what it was built on, wasn't it? The brilliance of the first fight, the strength of character of both of these guys, and we knew that.
Okay, well we can pick back up on that later on. We got some questions from Twitter to ask or to answer shortly. But while Huck Afolabi and the Maidana Lopez show are both on Box Nation, Sky are dipping their toes back into some international action on Saturday night or in the early hours of Sunday morning, and they've got a double header that pits light heavyweights Chad Dawson against Adonis Stevenson, and then they've got lightweight Cuban Yuriorkis Gamboa against Darley Perez, the Colombian puncher. So first things first, Dawson Stevenson. 2 years ago, you probably would have said Dawson takes a decision, maybe schools a guy who's a puncher but older, slightly more rugged and slightly more one-versed than Dawson, who's quite adaptable and very skillful. The X factor here is that Dawson is moving back up to light heavyweight, having boiled himself right down to the bowels of what his body would carry, 168 pounds, to fight Andre Ward. And we've seen in the past guys who've boiled themselves down haven't been the same when they've gone back up to their weight class, have they?
No, and we've seen it so many times, and we touched on it. Touched on it then with Huck, but I don't think that was really anything. I don't think that was an issue really with Huck. But we've seen it when people do it, and Ward and John Scully, who's been Dawson's on and off trainer, he was training for the Ward fight, has said, and I don't think it's sour grapes because he says a lot of positive stuff as well about Chad, but he just said, yeah, this could be a concern going into this fight because of the extent of boiling down in weight. He was 184 pounds when they arrived, and then 182 pounds I think when they weighed in, and then after 4 weeks of intense training in the heat, he'd put on 2 pounds. and he was 184, and the fight's getting closer and closer, and it's looking unlikely that he's going to get down. Eventually, he manages to get down in weight, but you can just imagine what his body went through, the trauma his body went through. Even though it's only a short space of time, sometimes people don't get over that. Physically, they don't get over that, and they don't know that they haven't got over that until they're in the midst of a fight. So we'll see whether Stevenson is the man to bring it out. The thing Stevenson is a renowned banger. I remember Manny Stewart used to always go on about how much of a puncher Adonis was. He used to compare him to Thomas Hearns, the noise of the punch in the gym and what have you, and the damage that it would do to sparring partners. But he's also coming up in weight, isn't he? So it's a huge, although it's kind of a step into the unknown a little bit for Dawson as to how his body's going to react. But for Stevenson, it's a massive step up in class. Not to say he won't swim once he gets there, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, where would you put your money? The bookmakers do favour Dawson to an extent. So where would you put your money?
I think you'd have to go for Dawson by unanimous decision. I would say that's probably the shortest odds for that outcome.
Yeah, I'd say the same. Obviously, Stevenson, I think, will maintain a puncher's chance until the end. I think it is his big chance, but ultimately, I think it is about levels, or it should be about levels. And if that's the case, then Dawson wins. The X factor is obviously, let's see what Dawson's got left, and it'll be interesting to see what he has got left, because if Dawson's not the fighter he was before he fought Andre Ward, then Tony Bellew could be licking his lips, couldn't he?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Tony Bellew's going to have his eyes very closely on this fight. He's in line to fight the winner. And as you say, if there's any sign of deterioration from Dawson, if he gets past Stevenson and Stevenson gives him a real hard time, but Dawson emerges victorious, then yeah, that's all the better for Tony.
I was with Dawson in Vegas recently, and he was saying how much he regretted the Ward fight and how his mouth wrote a check his body couldn't cash, and he seemed sort of really regretful that he took that fight. And I think for what he put his body through, it does make you wonder if that is a process that his body can't naturally reverse. That said, he looked in good shape in Las Vegas. He was in fine form in the gym, and like you say, though, it's just going to be hard to tell, isn't it? Until the bell goes and we see what's in there, it's going to be tough to see what he's got left, isn't it? It's not like he hasn't been around. I mean, the guy's fought Hopkins twice, fought Glenn Johnson twice, fought Antonio Tarver twice, first guy to beat Thomas Adamek. So he's been around and fought good fighters, isn't he? Until he fought Ward, he was arguably quite underrated. Now he was underrated beforehand. Now people just seem to have discounted him. It's amazing that they've discounted him, like he said, and he's still light heavyweight champion of the world.
I think it's unfair, really, that people are discounting. Basically, he took a chance, didn't he? Yeah. He took a chance in that Ward fight. Obviously, when the fight was signed, when everything was laid out.
Went to his hometown as well.
Yeah, went to Ward's hometown. He knew the odds were stacked against him, and however big the check was that he was paid, and I think that's the mark of a fighter. Yeah. That he did that. He went to Ward's hometown. He gave up every feasible advantage, and he didn't have to do that because he was light heavyweight champion of the world himself. Yeah. He was like, "Yep, okay, I'll come down in weight 7 pounds," and he did that. And that is the mark of a fighter. So I think we should give Chad a lot of credit for that, for doing that. We should also give Chad a lot of credit for what he's achieved so far. Okay, he's not the prettiest fighter in the world in terms of his style. He's not a thrilling fighter. You know what you're gonna get really with Chad. But that doesn't mean he's not effective. And he's been the most consistent light heavyweight, probably you could argue, of the last 6-7 years.
Yeah.
And certainly what he's achieved at light heavyweight is better than what, say, Joe Calzaghe achieved at light heavyweight. So you could possibly make a case of saying, when did Roy Jones was light heavyweight champion to what, 2003, 2004? You can make a case of saying Dawson has achieved more in this century than any other light heavyweight.
Yeah. You can make that case.
So I think we should give Dawson credit, and we'll see what happens against Stevenson. Stevenson's not like... I think if Stevenson was, say, 21, 22, I'd be a lot more excited about him. But he's not. He's no spring chicken himself, is he?
No, what is he? 38, is he?
I don't think he's quite that old.
35.
35, I think. Yeah.
So his chance, I think what you say as well is he hasn't boxed anyone near this level before. Possibly in the gym.
Yeah.
But he's boxed no one near this level. So it's an acid test for both, and it should make for compelling viewing one way or another. Maybe one for the purists rather than a crash bang.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm really looking forward to watching this one, the Dawson Stevenson fight.
So there's so many questions that could be answered. So I mean, there's intrigue, isn't there, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So, however, there could be fireworks on the undercard, as Yuriorkis Gamboa, most people's favourite fighter today, fights Colombia's Darly Perez, who's a puncher, and we know that Gamboa's tasted the canvas a few times. Looks like fireworks could be on tap once again for Gamboa.
He's one of those fighters, isn't he? He's one of those fighters, almost like the opposite of Dawson. I mean, if Gamboa adopted kind of what Chad Dawson does sometimes, I think he could look almost unbeatable. But it's that kind of vulnerability and his willingness to get into a scrap that makes him so exciting. But I've still got a feeling about Yuriorkis Gamboa. I remember watching him when he turned professional. He'd made the step away from Cuba, and there was a real excitement. I remember watching him, being convinced that Yuriorkis Gamboa would go on to be an all-time great. I was convinced.
He was the one Cuban who was going to ascend to above what any other Cuban had done before, wasn't he?
Yeah, I was absolutely convinced. And
in the pros, I mean.
Somewhere along the line, I think we're going back now 2000, 2006, 2007. And he still hasn't had that defining fight. He's 31 years old now, and you question, he's at a stage of his career where potentially he may not be getting any better. I'm not saying there's any evidence of a decline there. I'm not saying that for 1 second. However, he's at the point of his career now where he should be in these top. I mean, what is he going to be? Is he going to be the undercard? Is he going to be the chief support? He should be out in Las Vegas selling out by now. Yeah. Not selling out. I mean, selling out stadiums by now, selling out arenas by now.
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, how different do you think it could have been after he chinned Rogers Mataga in 2010? If he was paired with Juan Manuel Lopez before Lopez slipped up, if Gamboa had fought Lopez in that fight that everyone was sort of licking their chops for, and he'd done a job on Wanmar, which with hindsight you'd have to speculate that he could well do, although at the time Lopez was massively dangerous and a knockout artist to boot. If he'd done a job on Lopez, how different could his career trajectory could have been?
I think it would have been hugely. I think we've seen with a lot of fighters, it just takes that one fight. You win that one fight and then you're there.
Kawasaki Lacey, for instance.
Exactly, and that's the fight, and that was the fight. I mean, I remember. What was it, 2009, 2010, something like that? That was on the top of most boxing fans' wish list. Gamboa, and I think you're right. Yeah, with hindsight, Gamboa perhaps the more accomplished of the two, and would have emerged victorious. But is it down to Gamboa himself that he hasn't made the step up? I don't know. But I sense that we're never going to see Gamboa in that kind of fight.
Well, I think. In terms of what you're saying, there's two things there. Gamboa's manager, Tony Gonzalez, said to me the other day that they would be willing to come and fight over in this country on a Ricky Burns undercard, with the idea of fighting Ricky Burns down the line. And that shows you that what kind of position they're in, how frustrated they are, and how tough it must be for them to match Gamboa, who no one really wants to fight because he's not a massive draw. And you know, it's one of those risk and reward things. You're going to get filled in against him, and probably quite spectacular fashion. And unless he brings something heavy to the table, then people aren't going to risk anything against him. And I think Darly Perez, also a member of the sort of Who Needs Him club with 28 wins, 19 knockouts. I think it's a potentially really explosive fight, and I think Gamboa's got a point to prove. With what you say with regards to Gamboa's promotion. He was the love child, wasn't he, in the tug of war between Floyd Mayweather and 50 Cent. Yeah. And so he sort of fell between the cracks to an extent, and then he showed up on the Pacquiao undercard, where he had that up and down war with Michael Farinas. That was his last fight. He made that a lot tougher than I felt it needed to be. Not that I was complaining, but this is where 50 Cent will have to prove himself, wouldn't he? He's got to try and make Gamboa a star.
Yeah, and he's got the core ingredients of a star there. He really has. He's got an exciting fighter. But it's going to be a tricky one. Now and again, but you mentioned Calzaghe. Calzaghe was mid-30s when he eventually made that step up, or he eventually got that respect when he beat someone who was perceived to perhaps be better than him in Jeff Lacey. But Gamboa, with his style, I can't see him going on for years and years and years. I think it's got to be in the next 18 months
those
at the most.
fast, explosive fighters don't hit their peak at 36, 37, do they?
No.
You know, they arguably do it at 26, 27, not 31, which is what Gamboa is now.
Yeah.
So okay, well that's we're almost there with this weekend's action round preview roundup. There is a show at Glow, isn't there? Hennessy Sports promoting Channel 5, quite a late notice gig by comparison to the others, which have been set in stone for a while. James DeGale, pleased to see him back in the ring so quickly after his brief win in Canada the other day.
I think what James has always wanted is to be in the ring as often as possible, and he's getting that at the moment. The opponent, you could argue, is slightly disappointing. He hasn't beaten anybody like the level of DeGale, and it would be a massive upset if he was to break that against DeGale. But he's not, he's no walkover. And it's good to see DeGale active, and I think if he's having these kind of rather than what you do often see with fighters is that they will just wait around for a so-called big fight, or promoters will get them to just wait around for a so-called big fight. It's good to see DeGale, who is world class, I think, staying busy, and then when the opportunity for that big fight comes along, he's ready to take it, and I think it's good to see him out again.
Yeah, he's fighting Croatian-based Stepan Bocic, who's 38 years old, has a record of 26 wins against 6 defeats, holds an amateur victory over Carl Froch, but who's been on the B side of his career for a while, and he was stopped in 2 rounds by Arthur Abraham a couple of years ago. Yeah. But like you say, for a late notice opponent, they're not going to get George Groves in at 2 weeks' notice.
No, of course they're not. I think DeGale will win inside. Well, in the first half, I think that's a reasonable expectation. But the crucial thing is if he has a couple of fights like this and they build to something like, I don't know, a Groves rematch or whatever, or they've got their eyes on Froch or another world champion at super middleweight, I don't think there's any harm in taking these kind of fights. It's not like he's going in with a guy who is 1-46 and has been knocked out 27 times, and he's at least he's going in there with someone who knows his way around the boxing ring.
Kid Galahad also on the bill, and Chris Eubank Jr. Just one quick question about Eubank Jr. Will he follow in his father's footsteps and become a world champion?
It's a huge question. If the answer's yes, it's an even bigger answer, isn't it?
It's a good line, Matt. You should save that for
I think will he? To follow in Chris Eubank's footsteps it's such a difficult task, but sometimes those that are related to the famous, they'll find that a bit of a chain around their neck, but whereas Eubank Jr., he seems to revel in it. He'll enter the ring in the same way as his dad did. He'd enter the same music. He's got the same mannerisms. He actively seeks to impersonate his father. I think his style in the ring is different, but he's got a good chance, and I've been impressed with what I've seen so far. Will he be a world champion? Will he notch up as many defences as his dad? I'd be surprised.
Yeah. I think a key for these guys coming through, including DeGale, who you wouldn't obviously class as a prospect, but it's just activity. And there's a lot of fighters in British boxing who just aren't getting out as often as they should, as regularly as they should, and it's sad to see, isn't it? Because obviously the guys do have mouths to feed and families, and they've got to put bread on the table. But also in terms of what these guys could potentially be, a lot of it is down to what they do in the early days. You know, I don't want to use it as a regular example because it's not. But if you think of a young Mike Tyson, who boxed sort of 12 or 15 times a year for the first couple of years, you know, in and around that frequency, you know, that's where he learnt the trade, and he did so under the radar, fighting regularly all the time, getting used to his surroundings, trying different things that he learnt in sparring, in the ring. That's what it's all about, isn't it? It's getting out regularly, becoming familiar with the surroundings, and then stepping it up fight by fight.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you look at... I know, I agree, and I've thought that before with Tyson. You look back on that spell. He turned professional in 1985. By the end of 1986, he was world champion, but he had, I don't know, approaching 30 fights or something, or 25 fights at that point. And it was a case of, right, that fight's done, let's get the next one. That fight's done, let's get the next one. Yeah. Doesn't matter, you know, and there was a steady progression on who he was fighting. And we do see now, and in like what you said, I mean, De Gale, he has when did he turn professional? 2008? Yeah, and he hasn't had the amount of fights that he should have done.
16 fights in
5 years.
Yeah.
That's not enough fights.
Well, like you say, I mean, Tyson had that in 1 year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it, when you think of it like that? And I mean, I just think that for their development, you know, it goes. There's obviously deeper questions involved here when you look at people like De Gale, who obviously command a big payday for a fight because of his Olympic gold medal. But you end up looking at how boxing's structured, and you know, even along the lines of wage caps for 4-rounders or 6-round fights, so that people have to get out there and keep active to try and be the best they can be. Because, you know, as Frank Warren alluded to this week in the issue, De Gale didn't need to fight 8 or 10 times a year financially. You know, he was fine to box 4 times a year.
No. Yeah.
So, but still, interesting points. But good to see him out. Good to see Eubank Jr. out. And Hughie Fury, actually, who I think has had about 4 or 5 fights in a couple of months now, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly, and he's doing what I like to see, and that's I think credit to the promoters there, credit to what they're trying to do with Hughie, and he's fighting all around the world, and that's great to see, and that's exactly what a young prospect should do.
Yeah, okay. Now we'll just have a pause now to have a brief word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
William Hill, sponsors of the Opening Bell podcast. Bet £25 and get a £25 bet free. Bet now with WilliamHill.com.
Hello, welcome back to the Opening Bell. Matt, so we said on Twitter that we would answer some questions. Let's go through a few of these. Some might cross over onto where we're going to go a little bit later on in the podcast. Let's start here with Rob McParshan. Who says, do you think the Frampton move is a good one? What on earth is going on with Scott Quigg? Is it Hatton's fault? So there's 3 parts to that. Do you think that the Frampton move is a good one? Do you want to take that?
Yeah.
Okay, you take that and I'll do the next parts. Okay.
I think the thing with Frampton is, I think if he's going to be fighting regularly, I think that's the crucial thing. It seems that he kind of reached a point after he won the European title with a brilliant performance against Kiko Martinez, and then it kind of went quiet, and you were kind of wondering what was going on. I mean, obviously I think predominantly they want the platform for Carl. They want the world to see what's going on with Carl, and they've chosen Box Nation, and they've chosen Frank Warren. I think Carl has got the ability. I think he's got a manager with Barry Wigan who's got the belief in him. To be honest with you, is the move any better than where he was? I don't know, but if they can all work in harmony and get Carl fighting regularly, then yes, it will be a good move.
Yeah. And the second part of his question: what on earth is going on with Scott Quigg? Is it Hatton's fault? Now I know that we sort of pledged not to talk politics, but these are the questions that we've been asked. What's going on with Scott Quigg? Well, not a lot's been going on with Scott Quigg in the ring. He hasn't boxed, I don't think, since he beat Rendell Monroe in September on the Hatton-Senchenko bill. From what I hear, he's going to have a new manager sooner rather than later, and he could well have a new promoter. Is it Hatton's fault? Is it Hatton's fault that they haven't got TV? I don't know. It's tough, isn't it? I mean, Ricky's got a strong stable now, but you can see them starting to. You could see them starting to leave if things stay like this. I see Martin Murray's called out Carl Froch this week, which is quite interesting to see because it shows that he's keen to stay active and stay busy after the Martinez fight. Ricky's done a good job of getting his fighters out here, there, and everywhere. He's had Ryan Burnett boxing Liverpool. He's got him boxing in Ireland soon. He had Buckland, who was meant to fight on the Argentina bill. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. He had what else he had lined up? He obviously had Martin Murray fight on that bill. He's had Rabchenko, who's boxed on the bill in Monte Carlo. So he was getting his fighters out on other people's shows, which is good. Ultimately, it's going to be very hard to be a successful promoter without a TV deal. I can see Scott Quigg moving sooner rather than later. I don't know which way he would go. I would assume that there would be 3 people bidding for his services. 1 I would see as Matchroom, 2 I would see as Frank Warren, and 3 I would see as Golden Boy Promotions. That's pretty much all I can say on that, Rob, to be honest. So what on earth's going on with Scott Quigg? My guess is he'll be fighting within about 6 or 8 weeks, and then he'll probably fight, ideally for Scott, twice more before the end of the year. But I could see a change of the guard. Whether it will happen, I don't know, but I think it probably will. We've got a second question, similar from Brad, asking, is Carl Frampton a good or bad decision to leave Matchroom? Like you, Matt, I can sort of see both sides, really. Good or bad decision? Ultimately, we'll find out, won't we, if it's a good or bad decision. I thought Sky, and obviously Matchroom worked very closely with Sky, had put a lot of resources behind Frampton, Bellew, and a few others who they'd done big documentaries on and done a lot of coverage on. I know certain people in the Frampton camp disagree with that, which is fine. It's their prerogative. I think what's interesting, actually, about what Barry McGuigan is doing with Frampton is he's taking Carl back to the people of Belfast. He's got his debut. He's got this London fight in July. Then he's going to take him back to the people of Belfast and give him to the people of Belfast. And I think what they're going to do there is create a real brand, the same way that Hatton was created in Manchester. And now Frampton is known to the wider public. People will be keeping an eye on his progress over there. But he's already massively famous and well known in Ireland. So it doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks. If he's big enough in Ireland, the rest of the world will follow at some point. And I think that's how it was with Ricky Hatton. He was built in Manchester. He was massive in Manchester. And eventually the mountain came to Mohammed rather than Mohammed going to the mountain. And I think they can make Frampton a big enough star for that to happen. Obviously, it happened with Barry. So, I mean, let's see. Good or bad decision to leave Matchroom? My initial reaction was I was shocked. But now, with having had a long talk with Barry about it, I can kind of see where they're coming from. So, let's see how it goes. Matt, a couple on this next subject, actually. One from Paul Merrifield. Would you put Groves in with Kessler?
Right now, tomorrow, yeah.
Oh yeah, because Kessler's on holiday. Kessler's on holiday till July.
Kessler's on holiday till July, and probably not in fight mode. So I'll give Groves a chance. No, that's probably being a bit disrespectful to George. I think, to be honest with you, it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense, but I think that perhaps at this point, if I was Eddie Hearn, I'd still think Kessler needs something in between the level that he's at now and Kessler. Kessler proved that he's one of the best super middleweights in the world, and he's in that top 3. And I think that top 3 at the moment are above anything else. That's not to say those below can't reach that top 3, but at the moment they've proved nothing like what those 3 have. So I think Groves needs something. He needs a stepping stone to get to that level. If I was in that blessed position of being George Groves' promoter or manager.
I know he's got an assignment lined up. What do you think about Groves against Lucien Boutte?
Boutte, yeah, that's certainly something that would be more appealing to me as somebody in George Groves' team or as George Groves. I'm sure Groves wants to fight the best. He's made it quite clear he wants to fight the best. But Boutte, as Froch keeps reminding us, certainly now appears to be damaged goods after that beating he took in Nottingham. That fight was so one-sided. The finish was so one-sided, and you would certainly put someone like Groves in with Bute.
I think I agree with you though. And last week we were talking about it, weren't we? We were talking about Groves maybe fighting a Brian McGee or possibly a Stieglitz or Abraham before sort of sharpening his tools for the elite. So I think, and then there was one from Connor Jones that said, "What next for George Groves? Can he push the big time?"
Big time.
I think he will be ready to push the big time, but there's no rush. And I'd say, in 2 years' time, let's see where he is. I'd say 2 years a fair assessment for him to, you'd think he'd have another 6 or 8 fights, and what's the rush? The thing that I'd still like to see George in is a good hard 12-round fight where he follows instructions to the letter all the way through.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and what you say, what is the rush? I think there was a change. There was a change in George. He was initially saying there was no rush for him, and he would say that himself. He says, "Look, I don't want to hurry myself." And all of a sudden, in the last 12 months or so, it has been a case of, right, I want this world title shot. I want it now. And I think perhaps it's been because it was kind of put on the table with Stieglitz, and that then put it in his head that that's where that's the level that he's at. I'm not saying he's not at that level, but I don't think there's any harm when George is at the age he is, and the guy he's moving up nicely, he's progressing steadily. Let's not leap in with somebody that could potentially put him back so far that he'll never get back to where he should have been.
He's 25 years old, had 19 fights, won 15 by stoppage. He's impressed audiences in America. He's been on box office over here with the DeGale fight. What's the hurry? He's ticking a lot of boxes as he goes along, isn't he? So give him a couple of years, and I think he'll be there. I mean, he'll be 27 at his peak. Yeah. And I think he'll be definitely up there pitching for major honours. Yeah. Be interesting if he talks himself into a bigger fight beforehand, though. Is an interesting question from Marcus Bellinger. With Top Rank taking more fights to Asia, should America boxing be fearful?
It is a really good question. I think American boxing has possibly been fearful for a number of years, and it hasn't just been. I think it's been the threat of the whole world, really, in terms of, the heavyweight championship has kind of located itself over in Europe.
They've got massive insecurity about the heavyweight division at the moment.
Yeah, of course they have, and they've had it for a number of years. I think it's a good thing that boxing is branching out, and we've got it all over the world, and the rise of Zhu Shiming, well, not the rise, sorry, but his professional debut is the most watched fight in history or something. If the fact that many people are watching the sport can only be a good thing. I do still have kind of this romantic notion that most big fights, particularly heavyweight ones, I like to see them take place in America. I like that. And I do think there has been a slip of interest in America in boxing, and I think it would be hard to dispute that. I don't think the sport is dead over there. I think the numbers that pay-per-view are doing would suggest that that's not the case. Is it? I've forgotten the question. Should they be fear? Should American boxing? No.
Should be happy.
The world should be happy, and America should maybe take the chip off its shoulder.
Yeah, I think possibly. Just my 2 cents on that. You look at what Pacquiao did, and the Filipinos going to America, and all the rest of it. Can you imagine Zhu Shiming fighting in Las Vegas?
Yeah, it's a really good way of looking at it. Yeah.
And you think how big that could feasibly be for America.
Yeah.
There's a big opportunity there for America, and obviously he's promoted by Top Rank, as Marcus says, and I think that's there's big opportunity there for Top Rank, and they would have seen that. So the last tweet that we've got here is to both of us. How competitive do you feel a Haye Fury fight would be, and do you think it's pay-per-view worthy? Now this took us on to the next section of the podcast. Let's not dwell on it too much, but obviously answer the question, and then we'll just have a little bit on Haye and Fury. So answer the question, Matt. Do you think it's pay-per-view worthy, and how competitive do you think it would be?
I do think it's pay-per-view worthy. I think you've got Oh, it's hard to have that was my first instinct. It is pay because people will pay for it. Whether the fight will be something like Hay Kessler is a different matter entirely. Sorry, Froch Kessler. Hay Kessler, yeah. No, sorry, Froch Kessler is a different matter. I think what you've got here is that you would have a build up to a fight with their respective personalities, like nothing we've seen for a long time.
Even Hayden Chisora, I think.
Yeah, I think it would blow that out of the water. And they're both so good for a quote. They can both attract and repulse audiences with what they say. That I think by fight time, the whole country would be aware this fight was going on, and a lot of them will be thinking about dipping into their pockets to watch it.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think these guys get coverage outside of the boxing media and even outside of the sporting media, which instantly takes it to a different audience and the type of audience that does pay £15 for a fight. There's a lot that would have to be negotiated. Obviously, we understand that Mick Hennessy's are having ongoing negotiations with Channel 5. How would they feel if Tyson Fury ended up fighting on Sky Box Office? How would they feel if he had a one-fight deal on Sky Box Office and got knocked out in 2 rounds, and then they came back to Channel 5 with his tail between his legs?
Yeah, true.
There's a lot to factor into that fight. It's fascinating though, and it's one. Funny enough, I was messaging with David over December during our break, and I was trying to convince him there was a big fight, and I put something out on Twitter saying, I don't know if any of the listeners will remember, but I put something on Twitter saying how big would that fight be at Old Trafford? And I'm not going to claim I planted the seed in David's head, but I think you're right. I mean, there's a commercial mixture stroke explosion waiting to happen there, isn't there?
Yeah, I do, and I think that
David Hayes been in the jungle and all that stuff, and Fury's been in the press and done this, that, and the other. It's just, I just think that fight sells itself on pay-per-view. And sorry, let me just following on from where we touched upon earlier when I was speaking to Elliot Wurzel, what he said about being pay-per-view worthy sort of hit me actually. And I know you could argue he would say this because he's obviously been in David's camp for a long period of time. But Froch Kessler, pay-per-view worthy because it was a great fight, yes. Did we know it was going to be a great fight? We all hoped it would be and kind of thought it would be. Audley Harrison, I'm not justifying this as pay-per-view. There've been things like that. And I'm not saying Fury would be as uncompetitive as Audley Harrison because I think he obviously wouldn't be. I think what you have there is that part of the value in that, part of the £15 you pay or your gate receipt is the unknown. And you pay for that feeling, that anticipation that you have until the first bell. Froch Kessler, you paid for everything from the first bell until the final bell. Hey Fury, you basically, although you pay for the night, you basically sign in for the journey, the press conferences, the weigh-in, the sound bites, the media, all the hype, and you almost pay that £15, and then when the first bell goes, anything you get that's good is a bonus on top of that £15. Because that's the feeling I get when I'm ringside at a big fight. Your spine tingles, your hairs stand up on the back of your neck and all down your arms, and you get goosebumps, and you get really excited and really just on edge about it by being in the unknown. And that's something like that fight. You could say that's a priceless feeling.
It's true. It is true, and I agree with that. I agree with that to an extent. I think the complaint comes when you get guys coming back from the pub, and then they decide there and then, maybe 5 minutes before the bell's about to sound, that they want to buy into this fight, and then they hand over their £15, and it's a mismatch. It's something like Hay Harrison, which was a gross mismatch. And you can understand why they may feel a little shortchanged with things like that. But as boxing fans, I think boxing fans are not quite as fickle. And I think this is perfect pay-per-view fodder. And I think the fight, and you can't make the argument that although Hay is more accomplished, he's done a lot more. You can't say with quite as much, with anything like the conviction you could say with Hay Harrison, that Hay was gonna win, and he was gonna win easily. There's every chance that Fury could make this really difficult for Hay.
I think there's a couple of things that I think about the fight. One is if Hay wins, then he's beaten a 6'9" contender for the Klitschko to get in line
Highly
for
ranked,
the Klitschko's.
highly ranked.
Someone who's highly ranked and, you know, close to a physical specimen as you can get to the Klitschko specimen, might be the wrong word. But, you know, in terms of physical size and attributes, he's about as close to Vladimir Vitali as you'll get. So it's going to be the loudest way for David Hay to beat the drum for a Klitschko fight is by not just knocking off a contender, but proving that he can beat another big guy, which is kind of what he did with Valuev in terms of getting the interest for the fight with Vladimir in the first place. My concerns would be that if David landed a right hand like Steve Cunningham did in the opening round or 2 rounds, and you've got weeks and weeks of hype, then kind of people forget about the glorious nature of the absurd build-up that big fights get across the board, and it all just seems to get washed away and derided in 90 seconds. I think Tyson Spinks.
I was about to say Tyson Spinks, yeah.
You know, and it all just almost goes down the pan. And you think in terms of pay-per-view in this country, off the back of Hay Harrison, off the back of Hay Vladimir, 2 things that left a sour taste, there's every chance, and I would say there's every chance that this fight could fall flat. And again, there'd be a massive fail at the box office. Not in terms of take-up, it could be very successful, but with the aftertaste.
Yeah, I agree. I think and I completely understood it, and I don't want to knock anybody that gets in the boxing ring at that level, or at any level. But Audley Harrison, you could see in that fight why people were saying that he wasn't trying. I think he'd thrown 1 punch in the 3 rounds. I don't think you're going to get that from Fury, even if he goes in there and he gets knocked out in the first round. I would hope that we'd see some sort of belief, some sort of effort. And I think if you can see that, then it's easier to swallow, even if it's slightly disappointing.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. So we've talked about fights that might be made. We've talked about fights that are coming this weekend. One has been signed and sealed, and it's Floyd Mayweather against Saul Alvarez. I think we're going to have a heck of a lot to talk about next week in the aftermath of all the action this weekend. And next week we'll also go into some more discussion about Mayweather Alvarez and look ahead to what's coming up through the summer, because there are some good standout fights in the summer. But then when you look at Mayweather Alvarez, it really sort of whets the appetite for September. And as a consequence of that, the fight between Bradley and Juan Manuel Marquez has been pushed back to October. Another great fight. And incidentally, I just saw on Oddschecker a minute ago that Marquez has started a pre-fight favourite over the unbeaten Timothy Bradley, which is interesting. So we can come back. We'll be back with you guys next week. We'll talk about those 2 big fights that have been announced for September, October. There might be some more Hay and Fury news, and we'll also be recapping all of the big action that's coming up this weekend, both on Box Nation and Sky Sports. So we'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot.
Get involved with all the best boxing banter at our forum, and that's forum.boxingnewsonline.net.